Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Macri, and it is officially ranking season because fantasy drafts aren't far from starting up now. So, what better way to get you, the good people, ready than ripping through some 2024 fantasy football rankings, and to rescue you all from listening to me going through all these players solo. Joining me once again, Kate, the Great Magdziuk. Kate, you ready for some rankings?
I'm so ready for some rankings. And this is a good exercise because, we compared our rankings against one another's, and then we compared it against sleeper average draft position data. So we've kind of got an interesting feel of where our opinions of these players lie in comparison to consensus. And we have a couple of interesting shakeups that I think the people
Mhm.
are going to want to hear more about.
Yeah, that's kind of what the focus will be. Like we'll go through each of the players where we rank them, but the main kind of highlights as we go through are just going to be the players that we're mostly different on, either from each other or from ADP, right? And I've broken them down into like broken down the ranks into kind of like not exactly tiers, but like little smaller groupings, just to kind of reference as we go. But for organization's sake more than anything. But yeah, where we've organized them by consensus rank. So that's just the average of my rank and Kate's rank to see where we differ, which players were higher and lower on than each other, and then compared to that ADP as well. So like Kate said, we'll be using Sleeper's updated ADP as of June 18th, I think it was when I pulled it. So with all that out of the way, we shall waste no more time and talk about some quarterback rankings. And we got to start right at the top, right? Basically, our tier one of quarterbacks are Fantastic Four or Fantasy Tastic Four, however you want to call them here. We have Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and Patrick Mahomes in that top four. But I think a really good spot to kind of kick things off, and I'm glad we're different here because I think this is a legitimate conversation worth having, and one that fantasy managers are going to wrestle with right at the top for QB1. It's Josh Allen versus Jalen Hurts. I have Josh Allen as QB1 and Hurts as QB2. Kate, you have Hurts as QB1 and Josh Allen as QB2. So we'll start with you. How close is that gap for you, and maybe what's giving Jalen Hurts the edge over Josh Allen in your ranks right now?
The gap is like a sneeze. It,
Yeah.
it really, truly is. You can't really go wrong with any of these top four quarterbacks, even. But at the top here, the biggest issue for me in terms of Josh Allen, just to be clear, I flip flopped these guys in my rankings pretty much all off season long. But what gives Jalen Hurts the edge for me is obviously the talent, right? Is surrounding him, throwing to AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, who's an excellent receiving tight end. The addition of Kellen Moore this offseason, all of these things played into Jalen Hurts' favor. When I look at the Bills offseason, yeah, Keon Coleman, a guy that I was very critical of in the pre-draft process, not a guy that necessarily generates like the type of separation with route running that Stephon Diggs is. I think, Josh Allen probably going to sorely miss that. But Josh Allen lost more than Jalen Hurts did over this past season. Kellen Moore, the addition there is particularly interesting. This is a guy who's orchestrated, offenses with the Dallas Cowboys that like none of his offenses, as in any of his years as offensive coordinator, have ranked outside of the top 15 in terms of passing yards, have ranked top 10 in pass attempts in all but one season, which was back in 2022. Like, yeah, I think all things are kind of moving in Jalen Hurts' favor a little bit.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like it was super close for me as well. Like I had Hurts as one first, and then I swapped him with Josh Allen when I was doing my rankings. And again, it's just like the slightest of edges for me for Josh Allen. Last year, obviously finished as QB1, 24.3 points per game and 0.63 points per dropback, both slightly more than Hurst, but I think it's a good question to bring up with Josh Allen because I think losing Stephon Diggs is going to be the biggest question mark for him coming into this season, and I wanted to kind of look into that a little bit, and that's where it became like less of a concern for me because for Allen, I noticed that he only relied on his top receiver, so Stephon Diggs, for 19.2% of his total fantasy points, which was well below average for the position. It ranked 24th among the 28 qualifying quarterbacks. So knowing that, I then kind of got curious where I removed every quarterback's top receiver, whether that was a wide receiver or tight end, in games that they both played, just to kind of see how much it would affect where they would rank in points per game after that as a whole. And for Allen, and most high-end rushing quarterbacks, really, it just didn't matter nearly as much. Like Allen was QB1 in points per game last year with Diggs, and he was QB1 in points per game without Diggs, which was really interesting. Like Hurts dropped from QB2 to QB3s without AJ Brown. So again, not a big difference there because he's another one of those rushing quarterbacks. Lamar took Hurts' spot at QB2 up from QB3. Mahomes rose a little bit from QB10 to QB7. Jordan Love went from QB6 to QB4, which I found encouraging for him. And then Kyler Murray went from QB11 to QB5, right? So, you know, for the most part, the rushing quarterbacks, it mattered less about their top receiver. And I know obviously the talent of Stephon Diggs is not going to be replaced by Keon Coleman, especially, but he finds ways to still be a productive fantasy source for us because of his ability with his legs, and also to still be able to spread the ball around as well. Like he still has those guys on his roster that he can get the ball to. So, you know, even without, again, Stephon Diggs, who was wide receiver 9 in PPR last season, he just, you know, staying as QB1 in that points per game, knowing the rushing upside, knowing he can still, again, spread the ball to whoever and make it work, just kind of solidified my confidence in him as QB1 this season. Like, again, super
But all
close.
those arguments that you make for Josh Allen, you could pretty much apply to Jalen Hurts too, right? Like between the rushing upside and maybe questions about the tush push in general, just without Jason Kelsey there. But
Mhm.
like, you add in Saquon Barkley, that gives you some of that that press, gives you a little bit of tush push power. But like I think, in terms of the rushing upside, etc., we got to talk about Jalen Hurts in the same way, which makes me just come back to this idea that you really can't go wrong with
Mhm.
either of these guys as your QB1.
Yeah, that's why it's like such a tight, like, gap between the two. Like I could go back and forth on either one, and like the only part of it, like thinking about, you know, how much kind of the tush push continues to be used at the goal line without Jason Kelsey there to anchor it, and then also with them bringing in, you know, probably their best running back in years in Saquon Barkley. Like I think he's going to get more chances than their typical running back in recent years as well. Like I don't think it goes away completely, the tush push or anything like that, which is why like Hertz is still QB2 for me. But I just think it's probably less prevalent because of those two factors than maybe it has been in recent years. But just a thought, nothing to kind of support it right now other than the voices in my head. But that's kind of where I was at with, you know, battling back and forth between Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, basically.
Let's be honest. I mean, having these conversations in the middle of June, generally speaking, yeah, we're just going to be talking to the voices in our own head until otherwise. But like, I still think there's maybe something still to learn about both of these offenses. I
Mhm.
don't think either of them necessarily have all of their question marks answered. Like even for Jalen Hurts, as safe as I think his floor is, we saw that offense totally spiral in the second half of the season. Can they bounce back with Kellen Moore? But like, yeah, all of these things, I think again, you can't really go wrong. So like probably just depends on if you want to be the first person to draft a quarterback off the board and go for Josh Allen, or if you're cool sitting back maybe an extra round or two and grabbing Hurts as the QB2.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And the other discrepancy that we did have in this kind of top tier here is not from each other, but from ADP a little bit, right? Where sleeper drafters are leaning Patrick Mahomes at QB3 and Lamar at QB4, but we're both saying the opposite of that, and we have Lamar Jackson at QB3 and Patrick Mahomes at QB4. So is this another kind of tight race here for you for that spot, or is there, you know, like a clear cut obvious choice for you between the two, or yeah, would you potentially see yourself kind of going back and forth between Mahomes and Lamar in redraft at times?
again, one of these like very tight races. There is a small tier break here between, Jalen Hurts and the Josh Allen, and then the Patrick
Mhm.
Mahomes, Lamar Jackson for me. But the tier is relatively small. But I mean, again, one of these kind of groupings that I've gone back and forth in my rankings over the past 4 years, Patrick Mahomes has outscored Lamar Jackson in fantasy points per game in 3 of the last 4 years. 2023 was the only season in which Lamar Jackson actually averaged more points per game, which is kind of crazy considering like we know Lamar Jackson's upside as a rusher. There's also some question marks about how are they going to orchestrate this offense with him and Derrick Henry. Is there going to be some back and forth in terms of like goal line rushing opportunities? Are we going to see that potentially you take a step back for Lamar Jackson? But I just go back to the rushing upside, and maybe it's the recency bias in me. Seeing Lamar Jackson off an MVP season, you've got Zay Flowers heading into year 2. You might finally have a healthy Mark Andrews again. Isaiah Likely, I think, kind of profiles to fit into this offense in a increased role in the absence of Odell Beckham Jr. I think, yeah, that's where I'm going to give the edge, but it's a small one.
Yeah, it's it's close, but for me as well. But like the exact same kind of reasoning there. I think we're in line there with why we like Lamar over Patrick Mahomes just by the tiniest bit this year. Like I know Mahomes coming off the down year, but obviously, like I'm not concerned about him. We still have him in that top tier there. Like
He got
he's only
upgraded weapons, so I want to give him
yeah.
credit for that. Marquise Brown, Xavier Worthy, like all of these factors are big ones. You
Mhm.
also have to consider though that Travis Kelsey is another year older, and we did see that
Right.
uh, you know once he kind of got healthy down the stretch, he looked like Travis Kelsey. But it does make me wonder, are they going to try to preserve Travis Kelsey for the long haul, maybe use him a little bit less? And does that affect Patrick Mahomes' overall upside on a week to week basis? Those are all questions that I think need answering. And I think I just have a couple fewer questions about Lamar.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. I mean, look, Lamar, like you said, potentially a healthy Mark Andrews back this year 2 of Zay Flowers. Like, I'm not really concerned about Derrick Henry limiting Lamar's rushing, like especially considering kind of where he's at in his career. But that offense is Lamar
Wait, this
Jackson.
offseason, that was a fun little narrative that we saw coming out of OTAs. He wants to be more elusive and more
Mm.
more agile. Maybe we see like unhinged Lamar Jackson as a rusher. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting like caught up in that narrative too. But again, I don't really think you can go wrong. I think
Yeah.
probably on a weekly basis, you're like these guys are going to be top 5 finishers. So again, you can't really go wrong.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like it's just part of the appeal with Lamar Jackson, right? That rushing upside. I mean, running the ball 8 times a game on average, 11.3% scramble rate was the highest in the league. Like, can absolutely find the end zone on any given run as well. So you bet on the upside there with Lamar Jackson. I'm perfectly fine taking him over Mahomes, although, do enough drafts and I'm given that choice. I'll maybe switch it up a little bit from time to time. But let's head into the next grouping of players, and a few more differences pop up here, but not at the very top of this group. Where we have both have C.J. Stroud at 5 and Anthony Richardson at 6. The difference starts with our consensus QB7, Kyler Murray, who we both have slightly higher than his ADP ranking of QB9. You have him as QB7. I have him as QB8. Both of us a little more confident in Murray than the masses, it seems, and you're just slightly more into him than I am. So, what is it that's got you higher on Kyler Murray than ADP?
I'm excited to see Kyler Murray another year removed from this torn ACL. Like looking back, let's not forget, like, didn't play a good chunk of the season coming back from that torn ACL. But when he did return, he averaged 10th in terms of fantasy points per game coming off that ACL tear. Coming off the ACL tear, averaged 30 rushing yards per game, which I think is insane. And again, you can't really ignore the offseason addition of Marvin Harrison Jr. via the draft, who I
Mhm.
think is just one of the most pro-ready prospects in recent memory. In total, like in order of number of targets that these players received from Kyler Murray, these were his passing options. Okay, Trey McBride, Greg Dortch saw the second most targets from Kyler Murray last year, Rondale Moore, Michael Wilson, Marquise Brown, James Conner, Elijah Higgins, Amari DeMarcado, Michael Carter, Jeff Swaim, Zach Pascal, and Tony Jones. Who is Tony Jones? Like, that is what Kyler Murray was dealing with in 2023. And, even at the wide receiver 2 position, Michael Wilson, a guy that I like a lot, he's had a lot of problems staying healthy, both in college and that translated in the pros. Unfortunately, he wasn't healthy toward the end of last year, even when he did get to play with Kyler Murray. But a healthy Michael Wilson, I think, like, you could do worse at wide receiver too. Like, everything's in favor of Kyler Murray, and he's got the rushing upside to boot. I'm all in.
I'm with you. I mean, you laid it out perfectly. Like 8 games last year coming off that torn ACL. Like, while he wasn't perfect, he was really good for fantasy. I bet a lot of fantasy managers were glad that they stashed him if they did last year, especially considering,
Oh,
all
if
the
you had him on the
quarterback
IR
injuries.
and
Yeah. Oh,
you could
yeah.
be patient, you were rewarded.
Absolutely. Finished 50% of his games that he played last year inside the top 12 weekly quarterbacks. Like, the lowest he finished was QB 21, I think it was. Like, even coming off injury, ran the ball 4.5 times per game, 5.3% scramble rate. Like, we talk rushing upside. Again, he ranked, despite missing the eight games, he ranked 8th overall in fantasy points as a runner. Again, coming off an ACL and missing half the season. So pretty strong numbers there. Top 12 in points per game, points per drop back. Like, Trey McBride obviously emerged as a top weapon for him. And then adding Marvin Harrison Jr. to the mix. Like, it's a nice set of options there for Kyler Murray to throw to on top of that rushing upside. Like, easily, top 10 for me, and could be a legitimate contender for, a QB1 or top 5 finish this season with a full year under his belt.
Gosh, I miss primetime Kyler Murray.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, hopefully we get that back this year. Okay, the other discrepancy we had in this range, this one was between the two of us, because I'm a lot higher on Joe Burrow. He's my QB7 in tier 2. You have him as QB10 and in tier 3. So maybe I'll get on the stand here first and defend my Joey B ranking, because I think there will be enough people like skeptical about him after last season, right? So 2023, obviously, like, it did suck for Joe Burrow and his fantasy managers, but I am a big believer in him as a quarterback and a talent. I think he'll absolutely bounce back in 2024. I think we literally just talked about it last week in the bounce back episode. He was my QB pick there. So I won't rehash like everything from that episode. People can go back and listen to that one as well. But for me, it came down to essentially kind of forgiving and excusing last season because of the injuries. He was dealing with the calf injury to start the year. That led to a really slow start. And against 2 really tough defenses in those first 2 games of the year as well, with Cleveland and Baltimore back to back. So there were some, relatively predictable struggles there early on, all things considered, when, he didn't even crack the top 20 in weekly finishes through the first 4 games. But then he got healthier, and considering, where he's at in the offseason right now, potentially, his best shot at a normal offseason in the NFL so far. And I had to look this up. It was a Twitter account called @CincyProblems. They helped me kind of confirm this with a tweet that they put out back in September of last year. So 2020, Joe Burrow's offseason as a rookie dealt with the COVID situation. 2021, was rehabbing from knee surgery. 2022 had to have an emergency appendectomy. 2023 was dealing with that calf injury. 2024, he is rehabbing that wrist injury, but by all accounts appears to be on track to actually having, a normal camp in preseason, hopefully, right? And maybe this is just me, consuming an unhealthy amount of copium, because I love Burrow. But if we're using, the games where he was fully healthy last year, including games against the 49ers, the Bills, the Texans, he was QB4 in points per game, 22.2 points per game. And that's where he was at in 2022 when he played 15 games and was healthy, right? So that's where my confidence in him comes back. Like, T. Higgins also seems like he's going to be there. He signed his franchise tag. Jamar Chase, obviously still elite. I mean, the first team picture of Burrow, he comes out looking like Revenge of the Sith, Anakin Skywalker. Like, I'm all in at QB8. So please talk me out of moving him even higher up my list now.
I think all of your arguments are extremely valid. Honestly, my kind of biggest concern, I look at Joe Burrow, like let's go back to his 2021 season, an absolutely incredible campaign, 4,600 passing yards, 34 passing touchdowns, 108 passer rating. But even in those very best circumstances, right? 118 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, because of that lack of rushing upside. And again, maybe it doesn't necessarily matter as much because of his proficiency as a passer, but Joe Burrow averaged as the QB 10 in fantasy points per game in 2021, despite playing absolutely out of his mind on the football field. That year ranked 6th in total passing yards, top of the pack, 8th in passing touchdowns. Like, everything went right for Joe Burrow in 2021, but because of that lack of rushing upside, didn't necessarily translate to a big season for fantasy managers. You look at some of their off-season shakeups too. You had the departure of Tyler Boyd, which, say what you want about Tyler Boyd and what he offers at this point of his career, but he's been a pretty friendly target out of the slot for Joe Burrow over these past several seasons. You also need to rely on the health of T. Higgins, which could be kind of a wavering factor at this point. We talked about him on last week's episode and the number of hamstring injuries that he's had that have kind of derailed his career to this point. And that was probably a dramatic phrasing, but there just seems to be a lot of factors that kind of could contribute to Joe Burrow's overall production. And, I worry that unless he is, a top 3 passer in the league in terms of efficiency, which is well within the realm of possibility, there's just not enough rushing upside to kind of give the edge in that circumstance.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, I am assuming he gets back to that potential, top 3, top 5 passer in the NFL, right? Like 2022, he was even better from a fantasy perspective than like 2021 as well. I have him as QB4 as far as finish that year too. Like, he's definitely capable of it, but he has to be healthy. He has to, get back to that form, like you said. And it could be, difficult with that wrist surgery. Hopefully there's no setbacks or anything there. But yeah, I am a believer in Joe Burrow. I know he doesn't have the rushing upside necessarily week to week, but I think as far as passing upside, it's as good as anybody else in the league. So that's where my confidence in him comes from.
I think it's fair. And I could be eating crow by this point because, mid-season, in that kind of stretch where he actually looked healthy, he produced for fantasy. So like not a ton I can say there.
Yeah. Well, hopefully he's healthy. That's that's I think going to be one of the biggest concerns for him. And then hopefully, his receiving options are also healthy. So, all right, let's get into the next set of names here. We each have Dak at QB9, and then Caleb Williams becomes our QB10. I have him as 10 at 10. You have him as 11. So we're really close there. Then we get into the next bigger discrepancy here between the two of us because our consensus QB10 is Brock Purdy, who rises up the ranks with your QB8 ranking of him. I have him as QB13. ADP has him as QB12. So you love the Purdy boy here. What's got you bullish on 49ers on the 49ers QB?
So let's just say this is kind of contingent on Brandon Ayuk being present in this offense. Obviously, contract negotiations not going particularly well. But you look at Brock Purdy and, what they've kind of done this offseason, a lot of it points to them having this emphasis on the pass. They drafted, like 2 wide receivers, which kind of surprised me in the top 4 rounds of the NFL draft. I think they are making contingency plans, but like Ricky Pearsall going to be a huge upgrade as a quote unquote wide receiver 3. Juwan Jennings, one of the best blocking receivers in the league. But all of this is to say that last year, Brock Purdy was tied for the 2nd most fantasy points per dropback in the league. He was tied with Lamar Jackson, who, gets a massive edge in terms of fantasy points per dropback just based on his rushing upside. And Josh Allen. Josh Allen was the only quarterback ranked ahead of Brock Purdy in terms of fantasy points per dropback. It's not clear what is going to happen with Brandon Ayuk, but if he's in this offense, we're adding in Ricky Pearsall, who is a proficient route runner, who I think kind of even further raises the floor of this passing offense. Christian McCaffrey, who I think they are going to continue to involve him heavily in the passing game. Like, he's got all the weapons from a statistical standpoint. Like, you can make no argument against Brock Purdy. So, like, I guess if you're confident in ranking Joe Burrow as your QB7, I don't see why Brock Purdy at QB8 is all that egregious. Because, like, one for one, I think Brock Purdy probably in a better situation, right? In terms of play caller personnel. Um, I think Brock Purdy has most of the edges here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do like Purdy.
Not
But yeah.
enough. Not
Not
enough,
enough, not
John.
enough, not I know. And maybe I can move him up, right? Like, so I'm thinking about points per dropback, right? And this was definitely a stat made for Brock Purdy, right? QB6 in 2022 for quarterbacks with at least 100 dropbacks, QB2 last year. Like, the guy has been as efficient as they come over the past 2 seasons. My only issue with him, I guess, is just believing in that to translate to QB1 numbers again. Like, I think it'll be close, like assuming everyone
Doing
else
it 2
who
years in a row wasn't good enough for you. You need a third.
well, like one in a quarter of the season. But but like, assuming all the guys who missed time last year are back in the fold, like, and I know that's unlikely to be the case because guys will get hurt again, different quarterbacks get hurt, whatever the case may be. But looking at my like top 12 right now for me, like, I just don't know who I would take out in favor of him when, like, considering a healthy group, factoring in the upside. Like, again, like, points per dropback is high for him, but it's also like, it's not a high passing volume offense either. They were the most run heavy team in the league last year. So I think that does kind of continue this season. Like, maybe Jordan Love is the closest for me if I had to switch him out for like a similar kind of comp, but like, it's not going to be Caleb Williams. It's not going to be Jaden Daniels for me. Definitely not Burrow after I gassed him up here a few minutes ago. Dak, I don't think it's going to be him. So it's not like that I dislike Purdy as much as I just kind of like this year's crop of quarterbacks as a whole, where there's some really strong options to choose from. And he's part of that for me. So, like, if I did have a case to make against him, like, it probably comes down to, again, the team not being a high volume passing offense, where they were the most run heavy team in the league last season. And they still came away with like a lot of scoring opportunities. Purdy and the Niners got a lot of red zone work, which helped those touchdown totals, right? And part of me is worried about them losing their top wide receiver from last year in Ayuk, and having the third toughest schedule according to our strength of schedule metric. Like, these aren't major reasons for concern, because again, I like Purdy. Like, he's also in that tier 3 for me, where he is for you, but just at the end of that tier instead of the front of it, because of those things pushing him down a little bit, combined with my belief in the guys I have ranked ahead of him, basically.
I think it's fair, probably, but I still like, I don't know, man. Brock Purdy, 8.7 yards per pass attempt over the past 2 seasons. He's thrown for 50 passing touchdowns, despite, like you said, only playing like a season and a half, basically. 50 passing touchdowns, 18 interceptions. Of course, that includes the postseason. 7,100 passing yards. That ranks 13th among all quarterbacks in that span. Again, despite not even starting and not even earning the job until late in the 2022 season. Like, I feel like the production is kind of spoken for itself. We saw him also have an increased willingness to rush just a little bit more. We saw an increase in that in the 2022 season or 2023 season. I just think if you covered up Brock Purdy's name and we could, pretend his name was Joe Burrow, I don't think you'd have him ranked this low.
That's fair. Maybe it's definitely possible, right?
You have Mr. Irrelevant biasy.
I know.
Biasy?
Yeah.
No, Mr. Irrelevant bias.
Biasing could be a fun one to try out, but
yeah,
there you go. I mean, it's two different kind of cases, I guess, to be made there for Brock Purdy, and I still like
and
him.
I get
you
the
said,
run play percentage. Like, yes, led the league in run play percentage, but that also sets up the pass. That also sets up the ability to be as efficient in the passing attack as you are. Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
And I don't, honestly, even if they do lose Ayuk, it's not like I think the offense is going to be that much worse either. Like, I still think it's going to be a top offense in the league. It's just a matter of if Brock Purdy can maintain that level of insane efficiency, considering that they don't pass the ball as much and maybe without Ayuk. But we'll see. We shall see. But let's keep it rolling.
I can't wait to get roasted by this on social media. I
It could
cannot
go
wait
either way
for people to harp on Brock Purdy, but hopefully I got some believers out there who are maybe a little bit more excited to draft Brock Purdy in fantasy after hearing my case.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strong case for him. Like, I don't think anybody should be completely against Brock Purdy or anything like that. Like, he's done a lot in the NFL in his short time
Like,
already to
just
provide
again,
confidence. It's
cover
just,
up the name. If you looked at like a quarterback that had the type of weapons in the system that he is in, like, come on, guys.
Yeah, he's good. He is good. All right, let's keep it rolling here. The next two names kind of round out our top 12 quarterbacks, top 13, I guess, because they were tied in our consensus ranking. So 12A and 12B. It's Jordan Love and Jaden Daniels. Now, we're both just slightly lower on Love, but much higher on Daniels. So maybe that's probably the more interesting name to talk about here, because Jaden Daniels comes in as QB 15 on Sleeper, which is still typically higher than usual for a rookie quarterback, but compared to where we both have him ranked as QB 12, like, to me, this is maybe my favorite ADP smash at the position. So how are you feeling about being 3 spots higher on Daniels than consensus here?
Oh, I am all in on Jaden Daniels at this point. And like I said this, I had an article come out, I think it was last month, about my boldest predictions for the 2024 season. And it was one of them was that we are going to have 2 rookie quarterbacks finish inside the top 12 quarterbacks. I think Jaden Daniels at QB 12, like, I want to rank him higher. The only reason I am not is just question marks about the Washington Commanders and like, what is this team going to look like? But I mean, when you're projecting him coming out of college, and just to be clear, like Anthony Richardson, consensus QB6 on Sleeper ADP, like coming out of school, we really haven't seen all that much in terms of pro experience from Anthony Richardson because of that season-ending injury. So like Jaden Daniels and Anthony Richardson kind of starting off at similar points, right? And you look at Anthony Richardson and people are I've seen multiple posts this offseason about like Anthony Richardson being the dark horse overall QB1 candidate. All of that applies to Jaden Daniels, except for one thing, because Jaden Daniels is actually a better passer, I think, than Anthony Richardson. 92 PFF passing grade last year. That ranked 3rd among quarterbacks in the NCAA. Led the NCAA 11.1 yards per attempt. Led the league in passer rating. Also, to cap it off, you have the rushing ability. 92.4 PFF rushing grade. Over 1,300 rushing yards. 10 touchdowns. Had a 41% missed forced tackle rate on rush attempts. Like, the dude is elusive as all get out. I have concerns about maybe long-term health because of the way he takes hits and his smaller frame. But like, dude is Konami code like embodied. Why are we not all in on Jaden Daniels? Because like, if things went all right and maybe questions about the offensive scheme, like, I think he's got all the physical tools to finish as the overall QB1. And you've got Terry McLaurin, Questions about Jahan Dotson, but still like a good option. You have Austin Eckler, one of the better receiving backs in the league. I just think like we're not giving this dude enough credit for the kind of upside that he's going to bring to this.
Yeah, there's massive upside here, right? Like, and that's the most important thing for me for Daniels. Like, even considering, he's got a fairly decent offense to work with. Like, it's not Caleb Williams, Chicago Bears good, but it's good. Like, the most important thing is that he not only offers that rushing upside, but potentially elite rushing upside, right? Like, if you look at his college career, average 9.6 rushes per game, like Kyler Murray, who finished as a QB1 in his rookie season, he averaged 6.9 rushes per game for his career, right? And Josh Allen, who was our consensus QB1 here, along with Jalen Hurts, he averaged 7.5 rushes per game in college. So, like, the reason that is important is that run rate, scramble rate are actually some of the stickiest metrics to follow a quarterback from college to the NFL. And for Daniels, I think that gives him a lot of encouragement because he's scrambled at an incredibly high rate, more than any of the top rushing quarterbacks during his college career, 14% through 6 NCAA seasons. Like, with that considered, like, he has to be included as one of the top quarterback candidates for rushing production in 2024, on top of whatever bonus he adds as a passer. And like you said, he's a good passer. Like, even if you look at just this past year, the top 3 quarterbacks in fantasy points per game, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, all ranked top 3 in fantasy rushing points per game. So we just saw it, like you said, last year with Anthony Richardson, albeit on a small sample because he got hurt. So we do have to kind of hope that Jaden Daniels doesn't suffer the same fate. But that small sample was clearly enough for people, us included, to now be drafting Richardson as QB6, right? Like, I spent a lot of last offseason preaching for Richardson as a top 10 quarterback for fantasy, even tempering expectations some for Daniels. Like, I have no problem doing the same again for him as top 12. Like, going as QB 15 in ADP right now, like, that's such an easy pick in my opinion. Like, I'm going to take that every single time because there could be legitimate top 5 upside there to benefit from, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Caleb Williams, who we have ranked consensus QB 10, like, would I be surprised in the least if, maybe Caleb Williams has a better overall season as a passer than Jaden Daniels? No, but would I be surprised if Jaden Daniels finishes ahead of Caleb Williams in fantasy in 2024? Absolutely not. Like, the upside is absolutely tremendous. And if you think Anthony Richardson has upside as the overall QB1, I think you better be looking at Jaden Daniels and saying the exact same thing.
Absolutely. All right. Our next little grouping is probably the least interesting stretch for us in fantasy rankings, where our consensus ranks are pretty close to ADP and each other. Like, we have Jared Goff as QB 14, Tua as QB 15, Herbert as QB 16, Trevor Lawrence as QB 17, and Kirk Cousins as QB 18. So those last 3 we have exactly the same as each other and ADP. So the only one that is maybe like remotely interesting in this range is that we are both lower on than consensus is Tua Tagovailoa. So he's going as QB 13 in ADP right now. I have him as QB 14. You have him as QB 15. Anything you'd want to expand on for him and why we're less interested than the masses here?
I mean,
Slightly.
it's kind of interesting. He, despite having a absolutely monstrous season, 4,600 passing yards, completed 69.3% of pass attempts in the regular season, he still only averaged 15.9 fantasy points per game. And, Jalen Waddle, not necessarily fully healthy, but again, it didn't really matter. They had one of the most efficient passing attacks in the league, 101.1 passer rating. Again, doesn't really have any sort of rushing upside whatsoever. 74 total rushing yards on 35 attempts in 2023. But again, coming back to just what is the upside? Because despite having kind of ideal passing production in terms of efficiency, he was still the QB 21 in fantasy points per game in 2023. You know, I just don't kind of see the upside here. The QB 12 in 2023, who was Justin Herbert, averaged 18 fantasy points per game, right?
Mhm.
Can you guess how many times Tua has scored 18 or more fantasy points per game
In his career?
in his career?
Oh, oh god. 10?
15. But
Okay.
15 of 53 regular season games has he crossed 18 fantasy points per game. And that was the threshold for QB 12, right?
Mhm.
I'm just saying that, like, for as good that offense is and as good a passer as Tua is, like, this dude is about to be a top 5 paid quarterback. He had 6 top 12 finishes in all of 2023.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess, like, the thing for me, like, with Tua, like, I'm a fan of his. It's just that he's Kirk Cousins-esque in that, he's so reliant on his passing for fantasy production, like, so maybe it's just, like, a case of boredom too, like, but, like, there's also some concern there, like, where if something did happen to Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle where they did miss significant time, like, that could really hurt his fantasy potential, right? Like, we talked about it at the top with Josh Allen, where it didn't matter if he had Stephon Diggs or not, like, he'd still be QB1 in points per game without him. But for Tua, like, so much of his production was reliant on Tyreek Hill as well, who's, I think, maybe missed one game, I think, since joining the Dolphins. Like, if he missed time, it could be disastrous for him. Like, we did kind of get a glimpse of it last year. Tyreek missed week 15, I think it was. And Tua immediately turned into, like, this super low A dot QB. It was his lowest A dot of the year at 4.3 that week. Ended up finishing as the QB 23 for fantasy, right? So that's where I get maybe a little bit worried, and I tend to bump those kind of guys down just a bit, even though, like, he is, like, I think, one of the best passers in the league. Like, he graded really well for us last year. That's what kind of keeps him inside that top 15 for me. But I'm with you. I don't think that there's necessarily that weekly QB1 upside to get excited about with him right now.
Yeah, I mean, again, kind of ideal circumstances in terms of what he dealt with in 2023 and the level of efficiency with which he played. 88.6 passing grade that led all quarterbacks in the NFL last year, and we still didn't get a QB1 out of it, right?
Mhm.
Like, that's the thing. It maybe Tua is one of the greatest mismatches in terms of, fantasy production versus real life on the field production, because Tua Tagovailoa is a great quarterback, but it just, like, you couldn't ask for a more productive or efficient passing attack, and it still didn't translate to fantasy production. So, like, I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's fair. All right. The next grouping is pretty interesting, I think, as we get a bit later here and we're searching for, kind of the backups to help fill out our rosters. This is where, like, the CJ Strouds and Brock Purdy's and Sam Howells of the world were being drafted last year. And say what you want about Sam Howell as an NFL quarterback. He lived up to that sleeper fantasy QB we gassed him up to be last offseason. So, Kate, as we get into this later stretch here, um, do we maybe potentially have another one of those guys who could emerge, be that locked in fantasy starter next year, like a Stroud or a Brock Purdy? Let's run through our consensus list real quick here before you decide. So, leading us off at QB 19, Tennessee Titans quarterback Will Levis. Followed by Deshaun Watson. Both of those guys actually were tied in consensus rank for us with at QB 19. Then it's Matthew Stafford at QB 21, tied with Baker Mayfield, also QB 21, followed by rookie JJ McCarthy at QB 23 and Aaron Rodgers at QB 24. So, to me, there are two names that are maybe most interesting in this group. One that we're higher on than consensus in Will Levis, and one we're lower on than consensus in Aaron Rodgers. So, which one do you want to start with here?
Let's start with Will Levis, who I think is one of the more interesting sleeper candidates here. Had a lot of ups and downs as a rookie, especially as a passer. 61.6 passing grade. That wasn't what anybody probably had hoped, right?
Right.
But here's the thing: the Titans did a lot this offseason to make sure that Will Levis is given every opportunity to succeed. 5.9% big time throw rate. That was tied for fifth in the league among all quarterbacks, only or with Dak Prescott. You have, DeAndre Hopkins, who's getting a year older, but the addition of Calvin Ridley, the addition of Tyler Boyd, who I think is an excellent safety blanket for a guy who, maybe could tend or, to not use a safety blanket. Like he needs a safety blanket for sure. Um, in looking at his willingness to throw the deep ball, all of these things paired with the moves the Titans have made this offseason have me really intrigued in Will Levis. And, even from the offensive line standpoint, they signed Lloyd Cushenberry at center, who is, one of the top available free agent centers in the market coming off a career year. Drafted JC Latham. Like there was a lot to like about everything that they did. And everything just kind of comes back to the quarterback and giving him every single opportunity to succeed.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to like there, especially where ADP has him right now at QB 24. You have Miss QB 20, I have Miss QB 21. Like to me, it comes down to the team around him, right? Where, like you said, the Titans are upgrading from what they were last season. They bring in Brian Callahan as head coach after serving as the offensive coordinator for a very good Bengals offense the past 4 years. He also brings in his dad, Bill Callahan, over as the offensive line coach. He was with the Browns the past, I think, 3-4 years. So hopefully can help improve that pass blocking unit on top of J.C. Latham and Lloyd Cushenberry there. But yeah, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, you add those guys to the wide receiver core along with DeAndre Hopkins, who was already there, Treylon Burks, Tajay Spears. Like Levis, he has the arm to air it out. We know that, but I think if he can add some accuracy to that arm and maybe having, some of these capable wide receivers who can get open, that helps that, like where he doesn't need to be pinpoint accurate, that could, I think that could go a long way here in 2024 to kind of help his development. So last year, like he ranked second, tied for second highest in receiver drop rate at 8.6%. But at the same time, he also just had a 69.1% adjusted completion rate. That ranked 42nd among 45 qualifying quarterbacks. So we're putting a lot of faith in him to improve there. But I do
But I
think
think
like
a part of that too will come if, let's say he threw deep,
Mhm.
too often, right,
Yeah.
in 2023. As a rookie, despite not having really any pro experience, 22.4% deep passing rate. That is
Mhm.
off the charts absurd. That led all quarterbacks with at least 100 pass attempts. Like if you scale that back a little bit, and again, maybe use Tyler Boyd as more of that safety blanket, lower that average depth of target and go for some of these higher probability throws. And I think the weapons they put in this offense, I think, are conducive to that.
Mhm.
I think they could be in for an interesting season. Plus, there's the fact that like he's kind of sneaky athletic. And,
Yes. Yeah.
I think there's some, maybe a little bit of rushing upside there. We didn't see it as a rookie, but, as a junior in Kentucky, 376 rushing yards, 9 rushing touchdowns. Like he's a big boy and
Mhm.
he's athletic. Like get him in some goal line packages and we might have ourselves 4 to 6 rushing touchdowns casual. Like,
Right.
ugh,
Yeah.
I just fell in love with Will Levis again. Dang it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at too, right? Like I think, as far as those passing tendencies go, like coaching staff, NFL quality wide receivers, I think are going to play a big part in that development because it seemed like all he wanted to do last year was air it out, right? Like if he was throwing at least 10 yards, he was going for 20 or more because there was nothing easy in there for him. Like I looked at it among quarterbacks who threw 10 plus yards downfield. He ranks second in average depth of target with a 23.0 A dot. Like they're just, again, nothing easy for him between weeks 8 to 17 when he took over as the starting quarterback. He had 131 attempts of fewer than 10 yards last season, which ranked 24th among 30 qualifying quarterbacks. And a lot of the ones he ranked ahead of didn't play nearly as many games as him, right? So again, get some competent play calling that can allow him to develop and properly and not just air it out every throw. And I think we could have something here with Will Levis.
Let's go.
And then the other name was Aaron Rodgers. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we're being too harsh in our ranks of him since like we're at QB 23 for me, QB 25 for you. He's QB 19 in ADP, but like to be fair, the man's 40 years old, coming off an Achilles injury and currently on some ayahuasca retreat while the rest of his team is prepping for the season. So I
Mhm.
don't know. Maybe show up, do something on the football field to give us some confidence here before we get too excited for him. Like I don't know. We as the fantasy community obviously have a lot of eggs in the Garrett Wilson basket this season. So we need Aaron Rodgers out there. I mean, what do you think, Kate? Too hard on Aaron Rodgers, or is it possible?
I don't think it is too hard on Aaron Rodgers. And again, like maybe this is kind of like looking too far back, but let's not forget in 2022, Aaron Rodgers averaged 14 fantasy points per game. That averages the quarterback 28. That was behind Carson Wentz, Mike White, Sam Darnold, Derek Carr. Like it didn't translate to fantasy production. And as he's aged, less of those scrambling opportunities and kind of the less reliant on that athleticism he becomes, he is all the more reliant on an efficient passing attack. Now, I'm all in on Aaron Rodgers for Garrett Wilson and what he's going to do for Garrett Wilson's opportunity in terms of catchable targets and things of that nature. But I do wonder, what is Aaron Rodgers' upside? Again, QB 28 in fantasy points per game in the last season we saw him play. And then again, you kind of look at the cast, right? The group of weapons surrounding him. You have Mike Williams coming off a torn ACL. You have Garrett Wilson, who's one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League. But like, there's a lot of question marks about that depth chart in terms of receiving options. They don't have a go-to receiving tight end, right? Like they don't have a
Mhm.
number one option. They drafted Malachi Corley, who can maybe fill a Randall Cobb type of role, but again, he's a rookie. He's not a given. He's a guy that in college was used very close to the line of scrimmage, getting these very high probability completion, balls, and then letting him make yards after the catch. Like that was his calling card. If it doesn't work out, like if Malachi Corley doesn't do exactly that, we don't really know what he is as a wide receiver yet. Like I just think the Jets low key probably have some of like one of the worst receiving cores in the league. And it's very much masked just because of the presence of Garrett Wilson. And he, of course, makes up for that in a big way. But when you're looking at the depth of this group, it's kind of non existent.
Mhm. Yeah, we'll see. Hopefully, Mike Williams, could get back to health, but like that just
But
hasn't
he's like
been
missing
him, right?
all of these off-season programs.
Exactly.
And like,
Yeah.
so these two are going to step on the, let's say Mike Williams is ready for the season. He's going to step in with what, a couple weeks, maybe experience catching passes from Aaron Rodgers. And
Mhm.
he's already a big, like 50-50 ball guy to begin with. Like those things take time to develop. Like,
Yeah.
and health is not a guarantee for Mike Williams just based on where we're at in this offseason. So like, I think overall the depth of this group kind of concerns me. And then we pair that with what we saw from Aaron Rodgers in his last opportunity as a starting quarterback. Nathaniel Hackett, probably not going to hack it. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Eh,
Yeah, I'm with you. I
he's a
think
tough
like
sell.
we can still be, excited about Garrett Wilson and not necessarily about Aaron Rodgers himself. Like the two don't have to be mutually exclusive or
Mhm.
anything like that, right? So I'm with you. I'm not as excited about Aaron Rodgers for this season, and there's absolutely health concerns to bake into that as well. But last group here, just before we close it out, like we put like a larger group here, just nothing crazy, but QB 25 for us was Drake May. QB 25 was Geno Smith, and then it went into QB 27, a tie there between Bo Nix and Russell Wilson. QB 29 was Daniel Jones. We'll see what happens with him and his health. QB 30, we had Bryce Young and Gardner Minshew. Then Derek Carr, QB 32. QB 33 was Justin Fields. QB 34, Joe Flacco. QB 35, Jacoby Brissett. So it's a larger group there. Depth options here for deeper leagues. Anybody in that group that's of interest to you that you'd want to grab at the end of drafts here, just for their potential this season?
I mean, I think I have to point out the obvious. Russell Wilson's probably a steal at his ADP in what was like a fairly disastrous season. He finished as the quarterback 15 overall. Didn't have a ton of upside, only one top 5 finish the entire season, but he was pretty consistently like a low end QB1, high end QB2 that I think if you're in a super flex draft, like there's probably no better QB2 than Russell Wilson at this point based on cost. Like, yeah, plenty of questions about Arthur Smith, but we also have to remember the last time that Arthur Smith had a fairly capable quarterback in Ryan Tannehill, the Titans had one of the most efficient passing attacks in the league, and Ryan Tannehill was also pretty fantasy relevant. We saw Russell Wilson a little bit more willing to scramble last year, which I think helped. You have George Pickens, who I think is an upgrade on Cortland Sutton, right? If we're going 1 for 1. Question marks at wide receiver too, but I think Pat Freiermuth might kind of fill that role. And I'm going to be honest, for what we saw on the field, based on 2023, like I'll take a 2024 healthy Pat Freiermuth over a 2023 Jerry Jeudy. Like, I just think that we're probably underrating what we got out of Russell Wilson last year. And there's the narrative around Arthur Smith, but I think you have to look back at Arthur Smith's overall production as an offensive coordinator and not necessarily mash it all together with what we saw in Atlanta, because he dealt with a pretty different circumstance of quarterback play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's true for sure. And I think part of it too, like with Russell Wilson, being lower ranked too, like I think there is still that potential of Justin Fields kind of winning the camp battle. I know Justin Fields wasn't great as a passer really for his NFL career, but still talented, young, athletic quarterback who, could potentially emerge there at some point.
He could, but here's the thing. It doesn't seem like, based on what we're hearing out of camp, that's the case at all.
Mhm,
Like, it
mhm.
seems like it's Russell Wilson and a big tier gap between him and Justin Fields. Obviously, the fantasy community loves Justin Fields and wants to see that man in the lineup. But I also think, from the Steelers' perspective, it doesn't really seem like there are all that many rumblings of
Mhm.
Fields realistically taking over that offense. I think they want to, get Fields on the right track, maybe to develop him for future seasons. But I think the goal for the Steelers kind of seems to be that they don't want Justin Fields to play. They want him to sit back and learn. And I think the Fields narrative is more so fans projecting than actually reading what's happening in the field.
Yeah, no, I think Russell Wilson, yeah, I'm with you. The clear favorite to kind of start there. I just think, yeah, that's probably part of the reason he comes in lower is there's that Justin Fields question looming in the background. But I'm with you. I mean, you're locked into the Steelers as well, so you're aware of what the happenings are with that team and that depth chart. So, yeah, I tend to agree. Like Russell Wilson is going to be the starter there week 1, and if he isn't terrible, then he's just going to continue being in that role for the rest of the season. So, with that, we wrap up our first run here of 2024 rankings. I mean, I'm sure we'll update our rankings throughout the offseason. I might even have to revisit them at some point on the podcast as well. But for now, this is where we're at. So let us know in the YouTube comments who we're too high or too low on. I'm always happy to chat. And while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe. We greatly appreciate that as well. Kate, a big thank you to you as well for going through this with me and walking us through your rankings. So before you go, please let everyone know where they could find your rankings and your work as well.
Yeah, give me a follow on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. My rankings are available on Fantasy Pros. Got some good content here coming out over the past couple weeks for fantasy strength of schedule. So never too early to start looking at that stuff. So be sure to check it out.
Definitely. And then, yeah, as for me, all of my offensive rankings and tiers are up on pff.com right now, with IDP rankings starting to hit the site this week as well. So please check out those if you haven't already. Got lots of thoughts and data and rationale in those articles as well. So that's it for us. We are going to be back for the next episode with our running back rankings. So hopefully you'll all join us for that one as well. So until then, peace out.